place is already fuller. Yeah. Well, she told me like people today, like right here, she would want to have you.
To do this to people.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, how are you doing? It looks full. It looks full. I got more Russian. Oh, this is from last year too. Look at Russian here last year. You remember that?
That's in the quote. That's the quote that says you're from the region and you can put
I see.
Good evening. I'm Holly Taylor Sargent. I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Strategy and External Relations here at the Kennedy School. And about 10 days ago or so, I had the pleasure and honor of welcoming our delegates to the Women Waging Peace Project to Harvard. And at that time, I welcomed them to become a member of the Harvard and specifically the Kennedy School community. And I challenged them not only to be sponges while they were here in terms of what they took away and how they began their relationship with us, but also indicated that it was a time, an important time for our institution, the people inside our community and around at our margin, to have a chance to learn from them. You know, one of the great things about working here at the Kennedy School is that we continually look at our mission, which is to train leaders for public service and to contribute in a positive way to the solution of public policy problems around the world. And we ask, how can we optimize our impact on our mission? And we do that, of course, in several ways. We do that by teaching extraordinary students, like so many of you who are here tonight. We do that with a faculty that is not only committed to rigor, but is committed to relevance and courage. We do that by engaging in a debate and fostering dialogue in this wonderful place and in other places that allow different voices to be heard. And I can tell you that it is with great pride that I introduce this evening's forum to you, because this project, once again, is an example of, I think, a very bold, innovative, and courageous project that is the best of what we can be. Because the women who have gathered here to learn from one another, to learn from our faculty, and to share with us represent, indeed, leaders in public service. They also bring us information and experience that we don't often have in our classroom and in our hallways. They come having experienced traumas and extraordinary battles that most of us can only read about. But during this precious time that we have them with us, we can learn and feel and be inspired by what they do every day. And that is the best, I think, of an academic institution, to stretch us not only by what we read in books, but by the people with whom we come in contact. I'd like to take a moment to salute the extraordinary staff of the Women and Public Policy Program, who have put together the most amazing weeks of engagement, which is only a part of what they do for this project. They are, again, a great source of pride for our school. I'd like them all to stand, if they would, please, and be recognized. And finally, I'll turn over the program to Ambassador Swanee Hunt, a teacher, a mentor, a statesperson, a zealot, a shaker-upper of the best order, and someone who approaches every challenge with the notion that it can be done, and every person with an open heart. Swanee.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. I'm so glad you could join us. It's a great privilege to work here at the Kennedy School, this extraordinary place where scholars and academics and activists and policymakers meld into some great swirl. It's, having lived in each of those worlds, I am particularly aware how rare that coming together is, that learning from each other, that teaching each other. It's a rare dialogue indeed. Now, in our domestic policy, it's not quite as rare. If the president says he's going to have an initiative on race, what does he do? Whom does he call around the table? Well, he calls the African American preachers. He calls the Hispanic labor organizers. He also calls the business community. He calls the Conference of Mayors. He calls government officials. But he makes sure to dip throughout the socioeconomic strata, throughout the experience continuum, if you will, or the prestige continuum, and to draw from the natural leadership all along the way, because he knows that in our country, that's how change happens. We've seen it many, many, many times for decades in our country. Not so in foreign policy. In foreign policy, it's elite speaking to elite. Now, does it matter? Well, who are these elites? They tend to be probably 99.5% male. So what? You know, I mean, is this like, gee, women ought to be treated fairly so they ought to have a place at the table? Maybe. Who cares? Except those women who want to be at the table. Well, if in fact we were doing a bang-up job at dealing with violent conflict around the world, maybe it wouldn't be so important. But the truth is, we're doing a miserable job dealing with violent conflict around the world. As we sit here deciding what we're going to have for dinner after this forum, there are dozens of countries at war. So we have a failed policy at this point. That's the very bad news. Now, the very good news is that there is tremendous untapped resource out there. What is this resource? This resource is the majority of the population who, up to this point, have not been invited around the policy table. If we can figure out a way to bring women into the decision making, I believe, at an analytical level, I believe we have a much higher chance of creating a world that is not torn apart by humanitarian crises, economic disruption, and political upheaval. Now, what do these women bring? Well, they have at least 5 different elements of added value when they come around the table. For one thing, women tend to have their fingers on the pulse of the community. They know what's going on back at home. They know what the neighbors are saying when they meet at the market. They know what policies at the negotiating table will work or not work back at home. Second, precisely because they are almost universally second-class citizens, they work below the radar. over and over and over and over and over, you'll hear women describe situations in which they cross a conflict line that, frankly, a man would have been killed if he had tried to cross. So they are able to do much more adventurous work, if you will, before, during, or after a conflict, because they are deemed relatively unimportant. And the generals don't get so upset if those women are out there doing whatever they're doing. Third, we have found that women in this work of addressing violent conflict, they bear out the research that there is a gender difference in how women and men tend to operate in their organizing, in that women tend, not all, but they tend to be particularly adept at coalition building, at collaborating. Fourth, these women are highly motivated because for them, it's the preservation of the children that they have carried and born and raised, and now will have to go and fight. And they see these conflicts very often at a highly, highly personal level. As one of our women in Africa said, men tend to want a whole state. They tend to think in terms of boundaries and territory. Women want a safe place for their children. And that motivation is at a gut level for them. And finally, particularly because women are not in the mainstream, they are adept at finding alternative ways of working. They've had to get things done. So we have been bringing together a network of women now in 20 conflict areas around the world, including, by the way, the United States, where we have a slow-burning war in many of our communities. These women come here often at risk. When they go back into conflict situations, very, very fragile situations. By coming here, they may end up on a list of some sort. And they come here because to them the risk is worth it, because they will be able to connect with other women and know that they are not alone in their work. They'll be able to exchange strategies with each other. They'll be able to hear from policymakers about how those policymakers make their decisions. They'll be able to shape their organizations. I don't want to take one more minute away from the rest of our speakers this morning. First, you will hear from Regina Chirundaya, who has spent her life working on behalf of peace and women's rights. She has been involved with several advocacy groups in Burundi and internationally, focusing on the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund policies in Africa, immigration laws for sponsored women and family members, inheritance laws, etc. She works now as a trauma counselor, and she will tell you a bit about her work with the Women's Peace Melody and how that fits into the whole issue of creating a sustainable peace. Following Regina, you will meet Sue Britton from South Africa in Durban, who works with the Diakonia Council of Churches on their resource team, a woman of extraordinary depth and wisdom. And Sue, I'm so glad you were able to join us this year. Ida Kuklina. Ida, I actually wrote an article about your organization last year for the Boston Globe. The Committee of Soldiers' Mothers is legendary to people who follow this sort of work. The committee actually had babies, and now there's a committee of Ukrainian soldiers' mothers and Belarus soldiers' mothers, and I've seen the same kind of organizing in Serbia as well, etc. And Ida, we will love to hear about that work. And finally, our last speaker will be Norma Maldonado, who is from Guatemala and who is working at a very grassroots level and using her work in agriculture to bring women into a full understanding of the peace accords and help them know what their rights are and what to do if that peace is being violated. So you have a rich array this evening of 4 peace experts. We will listen to each one of them present very, very briefly a few words about their setting, and then we will open this up for a conversation with you as well. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you, Ambassador Swanee Hunt. My name is Regina Chirundaya. I am from Burundi, a small country in the Great Lakes of Africa. We have Zaire, former Zaire in the west. In the south and east, we have Tanzania, and in the north, we have Rwanda. Can you situate it geographically right now?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a small country. Maybe you've heard about it already since 1972, where about an estimated 200,000 people died, massive killings in 1972. Or maybe you've heard about it in the recent war that is actually ongoing, with an estimated, another estimated 200,000 people who have died for the last 6 years. It's been a really celebrity for mainly bad things. Without just going through and explaining exactly and in details the historical background of the conflict, I just have to mention that the gap that is now between especially the Hutus and Tutsi is direct impact of a divide and rule, discriminatory policy of our colonizers who divided and promoted actually the Tutsi groups for 2 reasons. The first one was because the Tutsis, the king was a Tutsi, and to be liked by the king, who was a Tutsi, they promoted the Tutsi tribe, starting actually with the royal family and then the other Tutsi. And the second reason why the colonizer would promote Tutsis before promoting the Hutu was just, remember that time, the racist education at that time. It's because the colonizer, who was the Belgian at that time, found that the Tutsis looked like him. He found that they had cheeks and the neck and the nose just like him. So there was a kind of connection between the Tutsi and the white people who were there at that time. So later on, of course, that thread, politicians took that one to exclude one another. When the colonizer left, that gap was already there. Gap meaning in education-wise, land-wise, because the first group, the Tutsi, were already promoted at the day of independence. So all social movements for social justice were followed by massive massacres, and this is actually something that brought the 1972 massive killings that you all know. Now, what do we have at this time? I'm talking about the 1972, but there are also several other cycles of violences that have been there because of exclusion in the society of Tutsis towards Hutus, and also and social movements that were being born. And violence that was being installed either in the name of social justice, claiming social justice, or just in the name of protecting the minority. Now, right now what we have is that we have, in the end, a traumatized society. That's where we come in. I say that I am working for Women's Peace Melody that believes that trauma counseling is definitely an unavoidable step to reconstructing the society in Burundi. So we do believe that we can't do anything about that. But I have to confess something. After studying in your schools, after studying in Canada, I went in Canada and I'm not doing counseling the way I've been told to do that. I've been told that we need to put space in between counselors and clients. But I have to say to my teachers that I'm not doing it that way. Just for the reason that crimes have been committed by high ranks officials. They don't want these people to know that they knocked on the door of Women's Peace Melody. Because knocking on my door means they are coming to talk. So what do? It means that most of the time I change my clothes, wear like them, and find them in markets where they are selling potatoes or tomatoes or something, or bananas. While I'm pretending to be buying tomatoes or potatoes, I'll be actually listening to some of these stories of rape, mainly, that you might share with us if you have time to listen. Sometimes it will be in generally public spaces. As you can imagine, we are in Burundi. Women don't just go anywhere. They're allowed to go to hospitals and churches, but not necessarily in bars. So which means that I can just pretend I am one of them, changing the look of my hair or putting a scarf covering my hair to go in a place where women can be allowed to go to. So I think it works. Now, with that work that we do, I'm happy to tell you that it works. That contact works. The friendship that I create between the space that I make a lesson between me and my clients makes it for women to speak. And also I have a honor also, and a pleasure to announce that I work with them. I go through a long trip with them, and I see when I ask what they do to deal with what's going on, it comes, sometimes it's, well, I bought a gun for my son, and from that point, revengeful feelings, sometime after a certain time, I hear, well, what I want to do is just money to start my own business. So I think that we will leave all of you to ask questions and let the microphone to my friends. But I would say that I'm satisfied, and we do believe that the wounds that were not healed are definitely a tool for reconciliation in Burundi.
That's so interesting. Seeing the sense in which the trauma counseling is actually part of breaking the cycle of revenge is at the foundation of your work. Thank you. Sue.
There are lots of different kinds of war, and I would have liked to have talked about breaking the cycle of revenge in South Africa or the struggle under apartheid, but I'm not going to, because I want to tell you about what's happening right now. Non-violent direct action of various kinds averted a bloodbath in South Africa, as you know, and I think many of you here probably played some part in that through international solidarity. Now we're waging a war against poverty, against violence against women, and against HIV/AIDS. The focus of attention has shifted from apartheid to economic justice and justice for women. A third of our parliamentarians are women, and that's great. And the Speaker of the National Assembly is a woman, and we have several women cabinet ministers. But the violence of the years of repression and brutalization is showing itself in rising crime rates, particularly in domestic violence and in rape. Rape both against women and horrifyingly, increasingly against children. And that is partly because there is a myth that if you have sex with a virgin, that cures you of AIDS. HIV/AIDS is a plague that's sweeping South Africa, and particularly the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where I live and where we work. Around 30% of the women attending antenatal clinics are tested HIV positive, with a high probability that their children, their babies, will also be HIV positive. AIDS orphans are increasing at rates that make it impossible for normal institutional responses to come in at all. The organization which I work for, the Diaconia Council of Churches, aims to help its member churches to take action on social issues, issues of social justice. And obviously that was anti-apartheid during those years, and we then had to analyze the context and say, what are the issues today? And I'm just going to tell you about the one of HIV/AIDS. We've long trained stress trauma counselors because of the years of political violence that left all of us, and I include myself, rather traumatized by those years of struggle. But increasingly, as we train people, we found that the people who were coming for counseling were also affected by domestic violence and HIV/AIDS. So while continuing to work on the grassroots level, we decided we had to mobilize the churches, and we decided to take church leaders on a trip to East Africa to see how the churches there were responding to AIDS, which had been more advanced there before it came to us. They were shocked. It seems easier to see a problem somewhere else than to see it in your own backyard. And they came back committed to working on it in our area. As our constituency is the churches, we try to use the symbols and the festivals of the churches that church people are familiar with to introduce our issues and to widen their response to issues of injustice. So one of the things we do is each year we hold a Good Friday service and a procession through the streets of Durban, focusing on a particular issue. And during the years of apartheid, for example, one year, the year that everybody was banned and silenced and the newspapers were banned, we marched through the streets with bands on our mouths. And at the final ceremony, we ripped them off and threw them at the foot of the cross, which was for Christians the symbol. The Good Friday service that focused on AIDS, we had a plain wooden cross, and as we walked through the streets, we had different groups of people, church leaders, political leaders, and then people with HIV/AIDS carrying the cross, symbolizing the suffering and the cross of suffering that people were bearing. And at the final place outside the city hall, the symbol of the city in which we live, we invited people, sitting as you are, to come up and put flowers on the cross. And then we raised the cross triumphantly, this magnificent cross covered in flowers, as a sign of hope, the tree of life from the tree of suffering. And for us as church people, as Christians, this was intended to challenge the churches to put their faith into action and to do something about this AIDS pandemic, to stop stigmatizing people with HIV/AIDS, to stand alongside and support them, to care with compassion for the dying and for the AIDS orphans, and to challenge the health authorities to budget, to provide for the medication that would enable women with HIV/AIDS to not have to bear children with HIV/AIDS. How do you measure effectiveness in action against a plague? Well, 4 years ago, you couldn't talk about AIDS in the churches in Durban. It's kind of a no-no, you know, doesn't affect us. Now you can go into any church in Durban and you can talk about AIDS, you can challenge people, you can bring material in. Peace building is about the struggle for human rights, even in a time when it's not obviously a time of war. And we are very engaged and believe people must be engaged in the war against HIV/AIDS at this time.
Thank you. So what portion of the population where you live is infected?
Well, 30% of the women who go to antenatal clinics are tested HIV positive, and it's estimated that probably 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of our general population is infected with HIV/AIDS.
Very, very different situation for you, Ida, that you're working on. Will you tell us about your work, please?
Thank you. I came from the big and unstable country, which is called Russia. There is a war in our country, but the irony of the situation is that officially and legally there is no war. There is only peace in our country. But make no mistake, this war was called on various stages by different names. It was called like a restoration of constitutional order, later on as an anti-terroristic operation, or just simple armed actions. It is a real war, where thousands and thousands of peaceful citizens and 18 years old boys who was taken to the army against their will are the victims of conflicts. Besides, there are parents of the soldiers. So this war brought a great mass of victims. I represent here the Union of the Soldiers' Mothers Committees of Russia. We are all Russian organizations. The committee was created in 1989, on the peak of perestroika. We were supported at that time by Gorbachev, by the deputies of the Supreme Council of the USSR, and so on. But the Soldiers' Mothers now are the most mass and grassroots organization in the country. We are working with more than 200 Soldiers' Mothers organizations everywhere. And we have got about 100 official members, organizations. What we are doing to establish the peace, to settle the conflict, I could speak about it 24 hours per day. I will try to say you that many things the Soldiers' Mother did for the first time in the history, in all the history of Russia. We said to people, enough to have unknown soldiers. Every military who was killed in the conflicts, every peaceful citizen should be known for their relatives and everybody. We were the very first Russian NGO who made anti-war statement even before invasion of federal troops in Chechnya. We made a project of amnesty in 1996. And we achieved the adoption of this amnesty by the State Duma. It gave amnesty to all the participants of the conflicts on both sides. Well, I could tell about it a lot more, but I would like to say what we are doing to stop this crime which is going on in our country. We are trying to mobilize public actions, public opinion against war, abroad and at home. We are closely cooperating with Chechen people who is willing to cooperate with us. We are pressuring the government to stop the war to begin the process of political negotiations, and to abolish the involuntary conscription. You know, we are just ordinary women. We don't complain that we are weak and helpless. We survived a lot during 11 years of our existing as a women organization. In the beginning, we were not recognized as a women organizations. Nobody knows. What does it mean, soldier mothers? Maybe they are for war? Maybe they are protecting only their sons? And that's all. No, we are for human rights for everybody. We are human rights organizations. We are for peace. We are for life and freedom. There was 2 international congresses of soldiers' mother under this name, for life and freedom. That is our motto. Well, to show you how we work in concrete situations, I would like to tell you a few words how we broke the information blockade which was established over conflict zone since the beginning of the second stage of the war. We called it the Second Chechen War, which began in August of 1999. In November of the last year, we managed to receive a special permission from the Ministry of Defense to go to the zone on conflict, and also they promising to help us with the transportation matters. We brought, without any permission, with us, first to Rostov. It is very near to conflict. It is where the chief of staff of the region is situated. And also to Mozdok, 5 foreign correspondents. In Rostov, it was a great fun. We masqueraded one of the journalists, a woman from France, as a Russian woman, told her to keep silence when it is necessary, and brought her to some military establishments. In the office of the military prosecutor, the military prosecutor understood that she is not Russian, that she is not soldier's mother. And she was requested to go out of the office. But nevertheless, these correspondents did very good work. They have been in Mozdok. It was the first time when the foreign correspondents were in Mozdok since the beginning of the Second Chechen War. And I think that is the example that everything is possible when you are eager to do something, when you are eager to achieve the life and freedom for our youth. Nobody can tell mothers not to love their children. That is why we are not afraid of anybody. And also I would like to tell you that I'm so glad to be here. I am so glad to have new friends, to share our experiences, and to present at the meetings on all the meetings, or at least those where I have been, of Women Waging Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
And that's sort of a showstopper, isn't it? Nobody can tell a mother not to love her children, right? Well, Norma, tell us what's happening in your work in Guatemala.
First of all, I want to thank everyone who came tonight despite the rain, and so glad to see friendly faces. And Swani told us all of you here are leaders in your own communities and waging peace in your own little ways. So I feel at home at Harvard School. A policy, a public policy, right?
Close enough.
Close. I will try to give you an idea of what Guatemala is about. I could start talking to you about Guatemala has not seen one day of peace since the Spaniards arrived in this land and this continent. We have over 500 years of bloody history, but I cannot cover 500 years in 10 minutes, 7. So I will talk about the last 40 years, and maybe some of you are familiar with this. In 1954, the CIA had orchestrated a coup d'etat against Guatemala. And some of you will know that the Dulles brothers, one of them was head of the CIA and the other was head of the Secretary of State. During 1944 and 54, we have a decade of democratic history. And what this government did was social reforms, including labor rights, titles to land for peasants. The government tried to compete with the monopoly of the electricity company and the transportation business that was controlled by the railroad owned by the United Fruit Company. And when the government at that time, Colonel Jacobo Arbenz, asked the United Fruit to sell off the idle lands at the price that they declared, and the tax system, they got really upset. And that was the end of our 10 years of democracy. We had, since then, been ruled by military governments. And so we sadly had to say that for bananas, we lost the thread of our history and dreams. And for those 40 years, over 200,000 people died, 40,000 disappeared, 150,000 widows. And the military waged a war against civilians indiscriminately. Indigenous people, intellectuals, academics, professors, artists, poets, students. So at age 18, I left the country because my family could not see me in any safety, and everyone around me was killed. So I left the country at age 18, and I became a lonely fighter until I found a community in the United States that I started working with in the human rights and the immigrant rights, and also work with different international groups like South Africa and Chile, El Salvador, Nicaragua. And I managed, I don't know how, to went to school there. I went to UCLA, where I learned my English and other things that helped me carry on my work that I was doing at home too, the human rights work. 1990, we started some peace accords process. And in 1996, the United Nations sent a mission to Guatemala for verification of the peace accords. At that point, a lot of us went back, and we start working back in our own communities and finding out how we could start back again, integrated in community. So I went to live with the internally displaced people. We have about 1 million displaced people. In a country of 10.5 million people, that's a lot. We have 22 different languages, and I work with one of the groups. I was learning another language at that point, and I still am learning from the resilience of the people who stay. And through the cornmeal projects, we organize women around issues that are important to them, or around issues of schools, or even latrines. We organize and learn each other about the peace accords. I have many anecdotes to talk to, but I just remember I'm calling here a little home, and it reminds me of the place that I work. It's in the jungle, a home with friends of mine. And thinking about Sue's remarks on the tree of life and the tree of hope, You will see there my brother's art there. He presented that to the Foundation of Human Rights in Guatemala. It's been awarded by that. And he calls it the Tree of Hope. I think Zoo called it the Tree of Life. I call it the certainty of spring. Because we're still fighting, we're working towards peace. We're mentally ill in many ways. We've been traumatized. And it's been very hard for me to listen to my friends, new friends from all over, and it's just been very hard to hold in sometimes. And luckily we have the love and care of so many people around us. And also their strength, your strength. And we go back home with more hope that this world is going to be more united, and women are going to do that through the web or in any ways possible. Thank you very much.
Now, as members of our audience who want to ask a question, make your ways to the microphones here. Are there any up there, or are they all down on this level?
No, they're there.
I think they're both down on this level. No, there are two up there, okay? And you know the routine. You say who you are and where you're from and ask your question. And as you do, let me further expand on Norma's comment about the web, which is that the women who are here are doing training in computer technology and learning the website that has been created by a sponsoring corporation, EMC, and they each receive a computer as part of their becoming members of this network, and we pay for their first year of, is that provider's fee? Is that what you call it? Yes. When you hook up, and with the website, they're able to do then real-time chatting or post messages for each other on the bulletin board. If you'd like to see the website, it's womenwagingpeace.net. Now, I can't see up above. Is there anyone at the microphone up there? Is there a first question that you have here? Yes, Beth.
First of all, thank you very much for your comments this evening. My name is Beth McKenzie, and I work here at the Kennedy School. I work in the Dean's office, but I'm most fortunate to share space with the women and women in public policy, and have had a wonderful chance to get to know some of you. I have one question. What do you see the role of the United States as in helping each of you in your nations to pursue the kinds of peace initiatives that are important for you in your local communities? Obviously, each of you would have very different responses according to your own country situation. So if you can do that, I think it would be interesting for us to know how you see our role and what we can do for you.
Who would like to respond? Ida?
Well, it is a good question, of course, and very easy one. Well, I see the world now a bit deformated in the sense of human rights and security. The bipolar world is over, but one polar is still here. It had to develop in something else, but from my point of view, it still remains to be the old, in many features, the old polar. I think the United States could do much more to establish peace in the world and to protect human rights, because the conception of human rights was born in the intergovernmental organizations with the participation of the United Nations, with the United States. But now, as I can see, the human rights protections is more and more don't coincide with the state policies. The state has got very often has got a double standards in the human rights protections, especially outside its borders. We made a statement when bombing of on the Balkans. We condemned everybody. The NATO, where the United States is the main pillar, Milosevic, the Albanian army, and our generals, who used very qualified, very correctly the situation on the Balkans to start the Second Chechen War. Even the military propaganda about this war, this PR company for the Second Chechen War, it was a copy of NATO action on the Balkans. And when the Chechen people was under bombing, it is also thanks to the policy of the United States and NATO. Thank you.
Thank you. Norman, would you like to add?
Just a few comments. It will be really important that the United States foreign policy will revise its, and remember what has happened in the past, and they have a huge opportunity now not to send that aid to Colombia, to stop that war against civilians, and not to let the Maya diaspora or the Colombian diaspora happen. I think there are many things to be done here. And I know that people who are here are dedicated and committed, but we need these boys to get to higher levels and to learn from that. We don't want to be knocking doors in all the churches and leader groups for help for Colombia and repeat the Central American or the Vietnam. We want the history to be a collective history of all this horror that we have gone through. And I think there's time still to do that. And I hope this is going to be taken in consideration, and I know how much pressure the public opinion can do on this issue.
Let me move on to another questioner, if I may, okay?
Hi, my name is Andrea Stanley. I'm the administrator of the International Visitors Program at the Harvard University Marshal's Office. And my question is for anyone who wants to answer it. And it's basically, what are you hoping your next step will be after you leave this conference, which ends, I think, at the end of this week, and you go back to your country? What are you hoping to take with you from the people that you've met and the things that you've learned here? What is the sort of next step that you're hoping to be able to take in your country?
As you ask your question, I should tell you that Thursday morning we will be spending 4 hours on that very question in terms of structure. But I think your question is very answerable in terms of what, as individuals, these delegates will take back.
What I'll take from this meeting a lot, first of all, I have a feeling that I'm taking all the strength of you all back home. It's important to see that in a country like this, rather than sleeping because you are in a peaceful country, you are here awake and thinking about all the problems that we are going through back there. So it gives us a lot of energies. So I have a feeling that I'm going, first of all, with a lot of energy from all of you, from the energy that put in thinking about us rather than just sleeping, because you might be able to sleep, whereby we are not able to do that. And also, we met 100 people here, roughly. I met 200 people. I have emails, I have connections. I know that the trauma counseling I'm doing, thousands of other women are doing it around the world. I have their emails, even though it's not easy. Email is not the #1 communication. Email is not what email is back home. But yet, I go with the hope that I'll get in touch. The isolation is out. Now, the coalition there is a positive grouping, a positive gathering of positive energies that grew in this group as a coalition building, and we know that we'll stay together. That psychological preparation of all of us that we do have to stay together. I wanted also to add something about the UN for Burundi, the United Nations in Burundi. As you might know, in August, a peace accord was signed by the fighting parties in Burundi with the help of international community, and the United Nations was there. Now, we think as peacemakers in Burundi that it's important that the international community stays there so that this peace accord can be implemented. The peace accord was signed with a blank page, and the title was Ceasefire. They did not discuss about the ceasefire because the international community said that we are going to sign the rest, we are going to go on, and then we'll bring the other parties on the table to discuss the ceasefire. For the civil society, ceasefire is very important. So we would like the international community to stand as they stood in August so that the peace accord could be signed to make sure, first of all, this book is not put in the garbage, and that the ceasefire is discussed, and all the other differences that were not discussed at that time, so that we can, in the end, get peace.
Thanks. Yes. Is anyone up there? No, okay, please.
Hi, my name is Bernadette Atuahene. I'm a first-year student here at the Kennedy School. My question is based, first I'd like to applaud your resilience and the resilience of the women that you work with. It's truly remarkable to be able to hear the stories that you are bringing here. But in the face of all adversity, we all have spiritual grounding. And here in America, I think that we often forget or don't talk about spirituality because it can be a divisive issue. But I do think it is something in other countries or other places it's used to kind of bring people together. And I'd like to learn, and I think just Americans in general can learn from you ladies, how you are using spirituality to unify women that you're working with, or what role does spirituality play in your work, or when you're working with the women you do work with?
Sure. Thank you. That's just such a great question, because the struggles that we're all involved in can't go on without strength inside. South Africa, most of Africa in fact, has got a tradition of having a spiritual base for all its work, and I think that we have the highest proportion of church-going people, or mosque-going people, or temple-going people than I think any of the Western northern countries. People still go to places of worship, and we also are working in an interfaith basis with people from different faith backgrounds. We like to start our work each week with worship as a staff together. I meet with a group of women twice in a month, once to discuss feminine theology and how it affects our work, and once on the new moon to do healing rituals, and rituals that strengthen us as women and help us to go back to do this difficult work that we're all involved in. So I think small groups of women meeting together to do the things that are good for them is an important part of our strengthening and our spirituality.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. And by the way, any of our delegates who are here, or my students or our staff, should also feel free to ask questions. But yes.
Hi. Again, I want to thank you for coming. This is a great experience to learn from you all. I just had a specific question, actually, from the woman from Guatemala.
And who are you?
Who am I? I'm David Silver. I'm a master's student in the education school.
Welcome.
Thank you. I studied at UCLA, and I remember speaking with someone, and they were telling me that in Guatemala and in certain places in Central America, the United States was supporting certain actions of a military government that was committing a lot of atrocities to babies and to innocent women and children in Guatemala. Things about like hanging from trees, very disturbing things. And frankly, I don't know anything about it. And I was just wondering if you had any knowledge of those type of atrocities and if the United States had any involvement in that.
Thanks for asking the question. Today we have lunch with Colonel.
Oh, no, General.
General.
General Scott, but you called him Terry, so that's okay.
Terry. We have lunch with Terry. And I raised that issue of the School of the Americas because the School of the Americas was being a place where the U.S. trained our own military personnel to do a lot of the torture and killing. And the horrors of Guatemala, most people call it genocide, had been like documented in many ways. And the trauma that is still going on, it's because the way we have done things. We have even an anecdote that there were some people trying to date some of the mummies in Egypt, and they didn't know, the archaeologists didn't know how old these mummies were. So they called the military people from Guatemala and they make them speak. So to that point, the way Guatemalan people are being trained and used to abusing and torturing people, it's not anything that has been a secret. I think it's being well known and documented, especially for pregnant women and children, because the military was trying to kill the seeds of the subversion, or whatever they call the evil that was in the wounds of women. So babies were killed with bayonets and then thrown in the clandestine cemeteries, and then in holes on the ground, and then set fire on. To the point that people today are doing the same. When they get fed up with impunity, they are lynching people and they're burning people alive, the way they learned to do it in the 80s. And also, I was going to tell you about, there was a cemetery that a place where the military buried a lot of adults, and on top of it they built a park. And so and then we later on found out, when we started digging for the victims, and we made a float, as the students made a float from the university, and it said, where the parents rest, the children play. So I can go endlessly telling you all the massacres and the horror atrocities of the military, but also the responsibility of the U.S. training those to not directly be involved, but training our military people to do those. And to this day, we haven't had any military or any civilian put into justice. So because of that impunity, people are taking the law into their hands, and we just continue with this madness.
Christine?
Hi, my name is Christine Gindy, and I'm a student at the Harvard Divinity School. And I have a question specifically in regards to the AIDS situation in South Africa. Has the government officially addressed the rumor that sleeping with a virgin can cure AIDS, or is this just common knowledge within the communities?
No, no, the government hasn't officially spoken about that, but it is common common knowledge, myth knowledge in the communities. And however much people try to dispel that or speak against it, until women themselves are empowering themselves to, in a very patriarchal, hierarchical society where it's seen as the man's right to sleep with, to sleep with many women, or to demand sex with their partner, their wife, whenever they choose. Until women empower themselves to be able to stand against that, I think that myth will go on. But it's really difficult to encourage women to do that, for they are dependent so on their men at this time. There is an unemployment rate of something like 45% in South Africa right now. So women are economically dependent in all sorts of ways on men. So I'm afraid that there isn't a really strong stand. Our government has a very ambivalent stand on AIDS, and are finding it really hard to say or to put into action their words that this is a priority and a health concern. They cannot find the money to ensure that every pregnant woman with HIV can have medication to ensure that their babies are not born HIV positive. So there are some real tensions within the country and within the government about the issue of AIDS.
Do you see economic independence of women as the real source of empowerment for women in dealing with this situation? Because they're economically dependent on their husbands?
In many ways, I do. And I don't know how that is going to be addressed until the whole issue of a skewed economy and economic justice in the country is addressed. And it's really hard because our government came in with a very great economic plan, and within 3 years had to change it. Well, had to. We were told they had to change it because of the pressures from outside. So we now have a kind of IMF-sanctioned structural adjustment policy happening, and there is simply not money enough for the health budget, and there's not money enough for job creation projects, public work projects that we all know could actually help the employment situation. So my answer is yes, I think it is.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Ophelia. I'm a junior government concentrator at the college, and I'd like to start off by saying that your stories are extremely inspiring and puts what I have to deal with on a daily basis in perspective. So my question is to any of you who'd like to answer. I'd like to know what you think has been the most effective means of bringing pressure to bear upon the government in your respective countries and bringing about political change, whether it's been outside pressure or protest and whatnot.
Sounds like an Ida question.
I didn't quite understand the question.
Say it again.
My question is, what have you found to be the most effective means of bringing pressure to bear upon the government to institute political change?
How have you pressured the government most effectively?
Well, the consequences of our pressure, unfortunately, are to some extent negative. Because in the first period of Chechen War, we did a lot to turn out the public opinion, to sign the peaceful agreement, not to punish those soldiers and militaries who refused to participate in the war, and many other things. What the state did do on the next stage, they just closed all the holes. They made information blockade. They closed our approach to the military units. They are opened only for those organizations, not human rights organizations, but other organizations, who are coming to soldiers with humanitarian help to give them the sweet or envelope, and tomorrow this soldier could be killed at once in the process of killing other people. The second stage of the Chechen War was very carefully prepared by the government. The soldiers were promised a good payments also, which played its role and so on. From the point of federal authorities, it was made quite logically and correctly. So now we are in a situation when we are trying to find out the other ways of pressure on the government. Of course, first of all, through the State Duma, though the situation in Duma also changed. And it is much more difficult for us now to work with the new Duma than to work with the previous one. Nevertheless, we are trying to establish this, we call it conflict constructive relations between the NGO, Soldiers' Mother NGO, and the state and military authorities. On the middle level, it's okay. We can solve any individual complaint. We can achieve many things. But on the strategic point, well, what the high level, the orientation of the government, the political orientation of the government in the matters of war and peace and so on, that is much more difficult. But we will work on it further.
Regina, similarly, when the peace talks were set up in Arusha, am I correct that it was all men who were participating and then the women organized? Can you give us a little bit about that? I know that there's some women here, Sabine and others, who were very involved in that.
I will tell you about the organizing, as you were saying about pressures, the organization of women, the gathering of women, because we wanted to be involved in the peace accord, just to be invited to the table as women. The challenge, we were invited as members of political parties. Women wanted to go to the table just as women. And so many marching, lobbying, organizing, advocating has been done by women in Burundi so that we can be able to be at the table. Now, somebody asked about the United Nations. We even went to the United Nations and also directly to the Canadian mediator who was there, so that him who knows that a table without women would not be a table in Canada and the United States, to understand that it's imperative that women be present there. But yet, we were not able to be to that table because political parties said that, quote unquote, they have everything in hands, and they represent actually the civil societies. They are actually the civil society. It was sad, but in the end we were accepted as observers. The civil society and the women groups and the youth were accepted as observers, meaning you can go, but you are not part of it. Regardless of that, women did accept the outcome of the peace accord, even if they were not there. We find that as a tool. It's a step. It's not peace, but it's a tool. We organized again now to say, okay, you went by yourself, but this peace accord, please go ahead and implement it. Now, ceasefire page is blank. Okay, we were not there, but we don't care. Now, talk about ceasefire and gives us peace. So we are still organizing, marching, writing, name it, anything that is being done about women, to know that this document is not put in garbage, because if this is put in the garbage, it will be the next Rwanda.
Well, there's an extraordinary story that this reminds me of, the Burundi story. Northern Irish, some of our delegates have told us about when the peace talks were going on there a few years ago, and again, it was all men who were there because it was only the heads of the political parties, at which point Monica McWilliams and a couple of other women went to George Mitchell and others who were organizing this and said, why aren't there women at the table? And they were told, because it's only the head of the political parties, you know, it's not to exclude women. Well, obviously you've got a structural problem there, right? And so the women said, well, can we organize our own political party? And he said, well, you could, except that the talks start in a few weeks, and they put together 10,000 signatures, organized the political party, the Northern Irish Women's Coalition, and in fact won some seats in the parliament. And they're the only non-sectarian party, so they end up then carrying messages back and forth. It's been an extraordinarily helpful thing in that fragile process. The story of Northern Ireland is replicated over and over and over in cultures that don't know that story. It has to do more with structural factors than it does with geography, clearly.
Just to inform you that we tried to do that. We wanted to create a political party for that reason. And we thought that it was too late, it's closed. No more political parties, we have enough.
Right, and that was with Nelson Mandela, heading up the peace talks. I mean, this is tough stuff. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Do you mind?
No.
Hi, I didn't realize, I can't see the mic from here.
My name's Ruth Mcquiddy, and I'm actually just a friend of someone who works at the School of Government who was kind enough to extend the invitation. And my question, it's more on a personal level. Sue, you were talking about how you and all the other women here in some ways have been affected by traumas and are victims of trauma. And I'm wondering, I find it very powerful that you're all now working to help others who have been through the trauma of whatever the various traumas have been. Obviously, they're all very different, but have common themes. And I'm wondering if working to help others who are perhaps also affected by trauma is part of each of your healing process from sort of the trauma of having your son be taken to war, or having your friend's son be taken to war, the trauma of watching atrocities happen in your town or in your country. And I'm wondering if this is part of a healing process for you all, as well as obviously something much bigger.
Would anyone like to speak from that very personal level? Norma?
Yeah, I've been very affected obviously by the whole history of the country, and we do that to each other in terms, at the family level. Like my mom sometimes wakes up and she's complaining about something, and I have to tell her, please, I just making an effort to get up and do my work. And so, but she has a right also to let out somehow. So we're learning that, and I think my concern now is I adopted a child, and I don't want her to go through all that. So what I managed to do is to put her in a private school, so she spent more hours with children. And of course, not everyone can do that, but I managed to do that for her. She goes to school from 6 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, and just comes home and shares her joy, and she dances flamenco, and she's all happy. And so we're trying to do it in our own ways, but I think sometimes we can really do it. I am under medication, and that's the only reason why I can sit here holding my little rock here, so not to run away from. But it's been an effort to be able to keep a vision when you have so many personal problems, to keep it going. And I think that's the major challenge as country. I'm privileged to go maybe away and take like weeks off, and I can come and I know how to live in this country, for example. But most people can. So that's the importance of organizing women in groups, how we start talking. We had a memory reconciliation program. It started 2 years ago, and our bishop was killed, and he was the head of our program. So we had a 30-year setback that way. And today we were sharing stories, and I remember asking for please and applause to all the victims, because when we ask for a minute of silence, we've been silenced too long sometimes. So I ask for an applause for all the victims, as odd as it might seem to be. And I remember in the bishop's funeral, we all applauded because he was a great man and he was trying hard. And so rather than keeping silence, people were applauding. That was the first time I went to a funeral where people were clapping to me. So I think all of us have gone through some sort of trauma. I can deal with this now and tell you a story. 3 months ago, I couldn't do this, or tell you, or talk about it. I think medicine helps, and of course, all the help and support of the people around us, especially this last 10 days.
You know, it's interesting because when you asked the question, I didn't know if anyone would want to answer, and now each one would like to answer. So you have struck a very deep chord here, and that this will be the last question. Ida?
You know, what the problem of trauma, psychological trauma, is a great, very important problem for us. You imagine, each of us has got some kind of personal trauma in a different ways and so on. Imagine, there is a very small office in Moscow, and 30, 40 people are coming for the help. And all negative emotions are on those women who are sitting on reception. They have to meet these negative emotions. Also, our practice showed that 100% of soldiers has got psychological trauma after military service, especially those who went through the conflict. One of our members brought her son after 21 days he was as a prisoner of war. For 2 months he was sitting in the corner of our office and kept silence. He didn't speak. He kept silence with everybody, even with his mother. Only now he began to transform himself into normal young man. So we are sitting on the volcano of traumas. And unfortunately, we haven't got any state program of rehabilitation for the victims of conflicts. We are not speaking about soldiers' mother. They're ready to work day and night to help the people. But there is no state rehabilitation program for such people. They're coming back, and they're bringing violence because they don't know what to do. They are not used to normal life. And it is a great problem. We have got only several regional, isolated, so-called rehabilitation programs, which are in fact very, very simple and primitive. Thank you.
Sue, and then Regina, very quickly.
I think we learn by going through it ourselves, and that is how we developed our stress trauma training manual, which we use now. When I came out of 2 weeks of solitary confinement, my family took me to a cottage in the mountains, and I spent the weekend crying and screaming and, you know, just releasing all that terror of those 2 weeks. Not all of it. I mean, some of it's still with me, obviously, but you know, that I learned then that was the most powerful way. If you can catch people as soon as possible and help them to express their emotions as much as possible, and so that's what we try to do. But I mean, it's too late for most people. I was privileged and fortunate to have that opportunity to do it right then. And so we have to try and help people, and that's how we started, long before our Truth Commission was set up, to run workshops in telling your story. And we find mechanisms to help people to be able to express themselves through painting or through art or through dancing or through molding clay, which perhaps can help them to start the process of talking, which is absolutely crucial.
Thank you very much for the question. But I do believe that activism and the Varon trauma counseling is not just something that you go and get in a book about university, Kennedy University, Harvard University, and just pick, okay, I'm going to do this. It definitely has, check in your own hearts. If you are here helping us through what we are going through, there's something. It can be for maybe having met somebody from our region, or it can be for something personal. Even for us, it's for something personal. If I ended up a trauma counselor myself, it's because I came across a trauma counselor who helped me when my life was just apart. I was then very happy, making a lot of money as a computer programmer at that time. And in Africa, companies were coming to me and asking me to, they're telling me I don't want this money, I want this amount of money. We are in 1989 in Africa as a computer expert. So I thought that was the job of the way. And then my life went apart when in 1993, the elected president was assassinated. And then there were massive massacres of innocent Hutu and Tutsi people in the countries. And my brother was in a boarding school, and he was in a boarding school, and the headmaster took the children in the same hall and put gas on them and burned them. That was in 1993, and several other members of my families died, and I ended up afraid of myself, of my own life, and that's how I ended up in Canada. And the trauma counselor who helped me, and I felt good about that, and I decided to change completely my career from scratch. I went back to school in social work, and I ended up a trauma counselor. As soon as I finished school, I was happy to go and do it for my people, because I knew we really needed it. From the point that I came from, how I was feeling about the other tribes, the people, the tribe of the person who killed my brother, how I was feeling about the whole group, and how I felt after finishing my school. I felt that I wanted to share that with my people by helping them going through the same process. That's how I did that.
Well, your question was so important because what you did is you made the link. And we hear the stories, we pick up our Boston Globe, we say, oh God, another story. It's new war, it's old atrocities, it's mass graves, it's whatever. And it's very, very easy for us over here to develop compassion fatigue. I just don't want to hear the stories anymore about these victims. But I will close by saying that what we are witnessing here tonight is a group of women who have been able, for whatever reasons, to take their experiences that in fact may have damaged other people to the point where they are mute and in a corner. But these are women who've been able to take those experiences and somehow be hollowed out by them, by those experiences, so that you have a capacity for the energy, the creativity, and the will to change life for others. I feel humbled to be among you. It is a great privilege of my life. And Norma, I think we will end with what you said, that we have had enough moments of silence and it is time for applause.
like any specific? Wendy's right here. I can introduce you. Do you have a specific question? Oh, you should. No problem. I mean, they're here